Welcome everyone to today's webinar on the topic of tissue and cornea donation from recovery and beyond. We're excited to be able to share a tissue and cornea webinar with you today, and thank you all for joining us. My name is Heidi Aguiar. I'm part of the Alliance team, and I'm going to go over some housekeeping items, and then I will turn it to Brittany, our moderator for today, who will introduce our speakers. So just for those of you who are participating today, we are recording this webinar and your lines are muted. So if you have questions for the speakers, you can actually submit them at any point throughout the presentation, but we will be holding them until the very end. But feel free to type them in as they come up for you. And the way you submit questions is on the bottom left-hand corner, you should see a blue chat icon, like a messaging icon. If you click on that, just type in your question, and then we'll be able to hold them and present them to the speakers by the end of the presentation. Coming up on March 28th, we have our next transplant webinar, which is titled Advanced and Current Status of Living Donor Liver Transplantation in the U.S., and registration is open for that. Also, for today's webinar, we are offering 1 CEP-C credit, and we're also offering 1.2 nursing contact hours, courtesy of Iowa Donor Network. And basically, everybody who's listening to today's webinar is entitled to continuing education credits. All you have to do is complete the evaluation instructions, and you'll be able to get your certificate. Now, for those of you who are listening in a group, whoever registered and is the one that received the link for this webinar is the one that will also receive the evaluation email. So please make sure that you note everybody who is in your group and send that evaluation email to the entire group so that everybody can receive their continuing education credits. Please also note that for the CEP-C credits, you have 30 days to complete the evaluation process, and for nursing, you only have 14 days. So please note that that is 14 days, not 14 business days, so 2 weeks. So at this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. Our moderator is Brittany Dunn. She's a member of our Get Connected webinar faculty, and she's also Hospital Services Coordinator at the Kentucky Organ Donor Affiliates in Louisville, Kentucky. So Brittany, I'm going to turn it to you to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Heidi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Tissue and Cornea Donation from Recovery and Beyond. We'd like to introduce our 2 speakers for the day. First is Dwayne Jolly. Dwayne has been with CODA, Kentucky Organ Donor Affiliates, for about 14 years. For 13 of those years, he was the clinical organ coordinator, and for approximately the last 2 years, he has been the Tissue and Donor Center Operations Manager. Our second speaker is Robert Gayhart of the Kentucky Eye Bank. Robert comes to us with 22 years of eye banking experience. That includes being a technical director. He was the executive director of the Lions Eye Bank of Lexington for 17 years, is currently the director of business development at the Kentucky Eye Bank, and Robert also has been a coroner for 13 years. So now I will turn it over to Dwayne.
Well, thank you, Brittany, and appreciate everybody that's on the call. Happy Pi Day to everybody. Hope you are able to enjoy that at some point today. As Brittany said, I have been with CODA for approximately a little over 14 years. And when I came to CODA, I was working in the organ recovery department. So a year and a half or so ago, when I began working in the tissue arena, it was quite a change. Not that the organ recovery section and what we did in organ recovery was not regulated, but the regulations were very different. So I want to kind of start today just talking about with who makes the rules and those things, those agencies that we have to follow, their guidelines, their standards, their criteria. The way that we're going to do this webinar today, Robert and I are going to kind of tag team some of this. We work very closely, our 2 agencies, and I think the way that we will present the information today to you guys kind of exemplifies the way that our 2 agencies partner together to really honor the gift of donation every single day. So when we look at from a regulatory standpoint, we have to kind of start with the FDA. The FDA has their criteria that has to be met, and those criteria are very stringent. One of the things, like I said, when I moved from organ to tissue, was the things that would not necessarily rule out an organ donor could very easily rule out a tissue donor. And there's definite black and white issues that have to be met. As we trickle down from the FDA, the American Association of Tissue Banking, we are accredited through them. Their accreditation period is every 3 years, and they have their own then interpretation of the FDA guidelines and their standards that we have to meet as well. Robert, you want to talk about the EBA?
Yes, the EBA is the kind of governing body along with FDA for the eye banks across the country. We're inspected on a 3-year basis by our peers. It's usually an eye bank technician and a surgeon that actually comes and does an evaluation of your program. It's a very thorough inspection, and every couple of years we get the FDA kind of on an unannounced visit. But the EBA has done a great job over the years regulating the standards that we all practice by in the Eye Bank Association of America. Also with us, the eye surgeon preferences, I'd like to speak to that just a little bit. I put that in there because it's not necessarily a regulatory thing, but it's something that all eye bankers have to kind of live by as far as when we place our tissue, because so many surgeons have so much variance in what they will accept, what they like, what they're comfortable with, and those are all factors that weigh into the type of tissue that we offer them.
And just like Robert mentioning the eye surgeon preference, the tissue processing agencies, those tissue banks that we recover tissue for and that process the tissue for, ultimately for transplant for those recipients, they have their own directives, and those policies and those guidelines change depending on their own need and the end user that they ultimately get that donated tissue to. And then last but definitely not least is each individual OPO tissue bank and eye bank policies. Just because the FDA says something's okay or the tissue processor says something okay, individual tissue banks may have their own internal standard operating procedures that they must follow. And understanding there's so many different OPOs and tissue banks and tissue processors that may be participating today. A lot of the information that we're going to provide is some of it's general, some of it is specific to us here at CODA, things that we have found helpful, some problems, obstacles we've encountered and how we address them. So some of the information again is from that 30,000-foot view as we look, and it is applicable to some degree to everyone participating on the call today. So the process starts generally with that initial referral that's received from the hospital, the medical examiner, the coroner. Here in Kentucky, I'm sure that's no different across the nation. We have multiple referral agencies that could be calling that patient into us. Primarily it's the hospital, but we do have some very active coroners. Robert, who's with us today, is one of those from Clark County, Kentucky. He refers a lot of patients from hospitals and works very closely with the hospital there in his home county. But the initial information gathering to ultimately kind of determine that initial suitability is critical. And what I tell nurses all the time when we do presentations is that we're trying to assess a patient over the phone that we've never laid our eyes on. And so much of the information that we're getting is very objective data, but there is some very subjective information. We're relying on them to be our eyes when they're doing their physical assessment of that patient. Even if it's an ER death, a lot of that information that we're gathering from them could make a huge difference as we determine whether we can move forward or not. But just general patient demographics, any current and past medical history. Sometimes when it's an ER death, this is obviously not something they may not have a whole lot of. If it's a coroner's death, we're going to try to gather and ascertain what is the suspected cause of death. When's the time of death? If this was a witnessed arrest, what was the time of death? If it wasn't witnessed, it's critical that we determine that last time known alive because that's when the clock starts ticking. We need to find out if it's a coroner's case or a medical examiner's case, do they plan to do an autopsy and what type? And I'll get into that a little bit later because we are very blessed here in Kentucky to have a very great relationship with the chief medical examiner in the state, and I know that can sometimes be an obstacle to some OPOs and tissue banks, and we'll talk a little bit about how we kind of overcame that obstacle and what we do to foster that very positive relationship. We're going to need to find out what IV fluids that patient has received in the last hour prior to death or the last hour prior to the last time known alive, and that obviously is a little stickier to try to get that information, and if they've received any blood products in the last 48 hours prior to that asystole time or last time known alive. So that information can come very quickly, or that could take a lot of detective work to try to find that out, and we realize that even the extra work that goes into determining some of this information is very critical and incredibly important to the mission that we have. So we have a 24-hour donor call center here at CODA, as many OPOs and tissue banks do. One of the first things they're going to do is going to check the state and national registries for the status of that patient. Many times determining who is that legal next of kin is tricky. It may not be the person that's at the hospital. There may be some spouses that are separated. There's some relationships that you have to figure out so that you're making contact with the legal next of kin. When the approach is made, if the family does consent, we'll complete that very detailed medical and social history, that the deceased donor risk assessment interview. And most of the times, that is completed over the phone. I know in Kentucky we cover 114 hospitals across our service area, so physically being in all of those hospitals is impossible. So we have a very good process by which we are able to interact with those donor families. And then it's just a matter of coordinating those recovery logistics with the teams. As I mentioned at the top of our phone call, we work very closely with our iBank, and so we rely on each other. There has to be good communication between your iBanks, OPOs, tissue banks to coordinate recoveries, especially if it's shared cases. Who's going to go first? Is the recovery going to be done at the hospital? Where is the recovery going to take place? Some of those logistics that really have to be ironed out to make sure that we are meeting our time frames as well as the iBank's time frames, and so that maximizing the gift is something that we keep at the forefront of our planning. Refrigeration, and I'll mention this a little bit more in just a second because this is obviously an obstacle that many times can either make or break a case. The FDA is pretty strict about it. The ATB is pretty strict about it. There's not a lot of wiggle room here. But if a patient, just general guidelines, if a patient is refrigerated within that first 12 hours of cardiac standstill or last time known alive, then we have up to 24 hours to begin the skin prep, to do the skin prep to begin the recovery. If that patient is not refrigerated within 12 hours of cardiac standstill or last time known alive, then we have up to 15 hours to begin that recovery. But the bottom line is for tissue recovery, we cannot have more than 15 hours of cumulative unrefrigerated time. And again, that's when we talked about playing detective. That in many times is one of the most difficult things to try to ascertain, especially when it comes to last time known alive. So obviously, in regards to refrigeration, we feel like that probably the best option is a refrigerated morgue, but understanding that not all hospitals have that. I know in some more metropolitan areas or urban areas that your hospitals could potentially have that with more regularity, but we work with a lot of rural hospitals in the state of Kentucky that do not. And so identifying this as one of our obstacles when we built our current facility and moved in the fall, in October of 2014, as we were building the facility, we recognized this as being an obstacle. It's cumbersome. It's labor intensive to have your nursing staff to change out bags of ice on a patient. Some of them will do it very gladly. Others, it creates some animosity and strains relationships that we may have with our hospitals because it is extra work on a patient they're not taking care of anymore. So we thought about that, and we built into our facility a 3-person morgue when we built our facility and moved in 2014. We have a floor scale there, so when a person comes in, we can weigh them, and we can begin that refrigeration period as quickly as possible. We work with a mortuary transport service here in Kentucky that will travel anywhere within our donor service area to bring patients to us. And so our goal is to try to get the patient to our facility as quickly as possible to begin that refrigeration and take that obstacle off the table. Look, if that's not an option, or if a family does not want to transport their patient, their loved one, then we can instruct them on where to place bags of ice. We've started with our hospitals to tell them if that's too labor intensive and you just don't have the manpower to change out bags of ice as they melt, then put a cooling blanket on that person and just turn it down as low as you can. And we've had a couple of hospitals that have appreciated that suggestion, and that's something that we can do because the ATB standards do support that. Robert, do you want to talk a little bit about what we ask our hospital partners to do for eye care for donation?
Yes. In all of our hospitals as well as coroner's offices throughout the state, we encourage them to and ask them to make sure that the eyes are irrigated with saline. We try to provide those kits to coroner's offices when they ask for them. Make sure the eyelids are closed. That's one of the biggest obstacles we have, because sometimes in the refrigeration process the eyelids will try to come open. And to apply a saline-soaked gauze and a cold compress or cool compress to the eyes. And it's very, very important that the gauze does not make contact with the epithelium of the cornea, which is the surface of the eye, because it can be damaging to it. It's also good to elevate the head to decrease any bleeding or swelling to the orbital area during recovery time.
So I mentioned that one of the things that we have done to foster a very favorable relationship with our chief medical examiner, our chief medical examiner that we had for years retired at the end of 2015, and the medical examiner that came on at that time as interim was very pro-donation, and we recognize this as a challenge that other OPOs and tissue banks have across the United States. When we sit down and talk with our new medical examiner, and we talk to him about the challenges that we have faced in the past and other OPOs and tissue banks were having, his comment to me was, Dwayne, you should assume that I will let you go pre-autopsy every time. And I'll tell you what an incredible gift that was, not only to CODA, but also to our donor families, especially those pediatric patients. I can tell you, probably count on one hand over the last year, the number of times that our medical examiners have restricted even a pediatric SIDS case where we have not been able to go pre-autopsy. His comment was, many times the pathology reports that the tissue processors provide are probably more thorough than the ones that he would be doing himself. So as we have fostered this culture of collaboration with them, we've just made sure that we always adhere to a protocol. In fact, when we talk to our medical examiners, they'll say, yeah, there's no restrictions. You guys can go pre-autopsy. Just follow your protocol. So we will draw blood for the medical examiners for their toxicology. We do take full external pictures. We'll burn those pictures to a CD to provide them for the medical examiner. If there's any unexpected findings during the recovery, we will take pictures of those as well. And if there's any unexpected findings that could potentially impact the investigation, we'll call the medical examiner to make a determination if we can proceed. This doesn't happen very often, but we want to make sure that they know that our goal is to work with them so that we do not interfere with or prohibit their investigation, any physical evidence. And then we provide them a copy of our physical assessment along with the paperwork and the CD, the blood. So we leave all of that as a package deal with the medical examiners. And I'll tell you, it has worked out really, really well. We have 3 medical examiners' offices across the state. In Western Kentucky, we have one near the Capitol in Frankfort, Kentucky, and then here in Louisville. And I'll tell you that culture of collaboration from our chief medical examiner, Bill Ralston, has really trickled down to all of the other medical examiners across the state. And it's just an understood thing for them that to be a part of this mission, to be a part of this process, and to do whatever they can to partner with us to make donation happen every time. And I'll tell you, I feel, like I said, I feel very blessed to enjoy that relationship, and we do whatever we can to foster that and that culture of collaboration. So, you know, when we're determining where the recovery is going to take place, majority of the time those cases are going to come to our office. Over the past 2.5 years, since our first recovery took place in our new facility in January of 2015, right at 70% of all of our tissue donors are done in our facility. And that's kind of where we'll fluctuate between 70, 80%, but a great majority of our cases are done here in our facility. But many times we still do. If a family does not want that patient transferred, or if it's logistically better to do it at the hospital, then that's what we'll do too. One of the things that we found out by having our own facility, I'm going to show a couple pictures here. This is our prep room. We have a body lift that's mounted in the ceiling. So we can do all of our we can do our physical assessment, blood draws, cleaning of the donor. This is also many times where our local eye bank will do the cornea recovery while we're in the next door through doing our tissue recovery in our OR. So it's a very nice setup for us. But if a family doesn't want us to move them here, then we'll obviously work with those hospitals. But what we found, one of the takeaways from this is looking at your individual obstacles that could be prohibitive or make your process less efficient. What we found is before we built this facility, we're battling and we're competing with a hospital's own surgery schedule. And when they've got a full, if it's during the day, it's going to take a while. We just kind of, there was an understanding that we're probably going to be bumped for a while. Well, when you're up against the clock with tissue donation, you don't have a lot of time to be bumped. When you're up against the clock with cornea donation, you don't have a lot of time to wait. And so their priority was to their living patients, and so our patients many times took a back seat. And so one of the things we have found in conjunction with our mortuary transport service, we can maximize the number of donors that we do. We can do a case here while we send our mortuary service to pick up another donor from a hospital and bring them back in, whereas without doing them in-house, we would have to pack, send the team there, and you're obviously eating up a lot of travel time when that's time you could be spending doing the recovery. So the recovery process itself, again, very kind of in general terms, has to begin with the identification of that donor. If your donor's identification, if you cannot ascertain who that donor is, you obviously don't want to move forward. And then once you've positively identified your donor, a good, very thorough physical assessment. Blood is going to be collected for infectious disease testing. In our case, we do all of that in our prep room. We then move them into our donor OR, where we'll begin the sterile prep and drape of our donor. Just like, much like any other surgery, obviously sterility is of paramount importance in what we all do on a daily basis. It's important to know from your authorization what tissues you have consent for, so that you're not recovering something that's not authorized. And so it's critical communication among your team members so that everyone is on the same page is incredibly important. And then those certain tissues based on process or directives will be cultured if applicable. Donor reconstruction takes place. Now I know, again, I put in here refer to your individual agency policy. I know that this practice and the policy may differ from OPO and tissue bank to other OPOs and tissue banks, but it is our policy here to do full reconstruction on all of our donors. I will tell you this, just from a mission standpoint, this is probably the time in the process where I personally find some of the most satisfaction because it's sort of that last thing that I can do to give back to that donor and donor family to thank them for their sacrifice. Post-recovery, the tissues that we recovered, the blood that's been collected in those cultures are sent to the processing agency, whoever that tissue processing partner are, or that serology lab. Once the infectious disease testing comes back and is completed, that will then kind of lead into a very extensive chart review. And those tissues at the processing partners will stay in quarantine until all information is reviewed, approved by their medical director, and signed off as a final suitability. Once it's released, then those gifts can be made into grafts that are available for transplant. Just in general, again, I know that there's lots of different OPOs and tissue banks on the call today, so your agency may recover more or less than that's listed here, but in general, and we'll talk a little bit more, Robert's going to talk a little bit more about the corneas in just a second, but you can see some of the reasons and indications for cornea recovery, for heart valve recovery, bone and tendon, probably the most donated tissue. A lot of really neat and innovative advances going on right now with musculoskeletal tissue in regards to those osteobiologics, whereas in the past you primarily relied on that bone tissue that was demineralized bone, cancellous bone, cortical bone. A lot of the innovative things that are going on now are those more osteoinductive, osteoconductive, and osteogenic tissues that are out there, and there's lots of different products on the market. We currently recover a tissue Vivigen for LifeNet Health, and the technology is ever advancing, and so it's really awesome to be a part of a field that not only is on the cutting edge of medicine, but also is able to help so many people in the process. Saphenous vein, if your agency recovers that, primarily used for vascular surgeries, cardiovascular procedures. I have family members that have benefited directly from cardiovascular surgeries in relation to cadaveric veins. So I'm very grateful personally for the gift that these donor families give, and also professionally for being able to be a part of such an awesome mission. And obviously, for those that recover skin, that helps burn victims and other applications for both split thickness skin as well as full thickness skin. Robert?
Talking about the cornea transplants, as you were told earlier, I've been in eye banking since 1995, and I've seen a whole switch and change in the use of cornea tissue over the many years I've been in the industry. These are some of the indicators for transplants. You have trauma to the eye, infection to the cornea, keratoconus, Fuchs dystrophy, which is one of the big indicators for transplant, also pseudophakic bullous keratopathy and cornea degeneration. Here you get to see in the one on the right says traditional cornea transplant stitched all around the cornea. That's usually that's a picture of a full thickness penetrating graft. Any of you that are on the line and on the call today that are eye bankers, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say a full thickness penetrating keratoplasty. Let's go on to the next slide. When I said earlier that there's a lot of different usages of cornea tissue today, the penetrating keratoplasty, which is kind of what was around when I first started and was about the only thing that we were doing and what we were doing the most of. But now, in the last several years, the endothelial keratoplasty surgeries have come along, and you have the DSAIC and the DMAIC surgeries happening today. And what's really been an interesting switch in eye banking from the years when I started till now is eye banks are now processors of preparing this tissue of DSAIC and DMAIC to be used in the transplant. Most of these surgeries started with surgeon preparation in the ORs and soon switched to eye bank preparation because we could prepare more of them and get a better feel for what we were doing than the surgeon expending the cost of OR time to do these procedures. The next one there is the glycerin preserved corneas through GSN, which is a global site network with the Alabama Eye Bank. We have participated in that for the last several years, and those glycerin preserved corneas can be used for glaucoma shunt coverage. It's clear cornea tissue, so the shunt can be viewed a whole lot easier by the treating physician, as well as sclerografts. The glycerin corneas are also used in the developing world to provide cornea transplants because they can be put on the shelf for up to, I think, 5 years.
So I think that it's easy when we talk about the technical side of what we do, both in tissue and cornea recovery and ultimately transplant. It's very easy to kind of think that's where it ends. And I think it's incredibly important to not lose sight of why we do what we do. Who's at the center of everything we do? We provide this a donor medal to every tissue, cornea, and organ donor that we have here at CODA. It's our way of obviously a tribute to the legacy that this individual leaves, that this family leaves on behalf of their loved one. In the case of non-registered donors. But we have a very active aftercare. It's important that we not lose sight of the family, that we not let them feel like that, well, the donation's over, thank you so much, hope you have a fantastic life. That's not at all what we want to demonstrate and communicate to our families. Here at CODA, our aftercare program is incredibly active with our families, and so as we talk about the cornea recovery and tissue recovery and beyond, this is really part of the beyond. It's helping those families get through the next several months. For you and I that are on the phone call today, hopefully we won't have to be put in these families' shoes. Hopefully we are able to celebrate another birthday, that we're able to enjoy another summer vacation, another Christmas holiday, and not take those for granted. But these are individuals who are needing some extra help to get through these. Our initial aftercare is that first letter to our family, which is an introduction to our aftercare program, where we provide them a family grief packet. We do intervals throughout an 18-month period where we communicate with the families at 3 months. We're just going to send them a letter of encouragement and check in with them to see how they're doing. Give them some information about some aftercare grief tips through a newsletter, and then also make sure that they have resources or knowledge of the resources available to them in regards to the CODA website for additional support resources. At the 6-month period, we're going to send them another letter, give them some information about our donor family quilt that they can be a part of, information about our donor family council, and just that 6-month survey. We want to always make sure that what we're doing is we're doing it for the right reasons. And just because we've been doing it for a long time doesn't mean that that's the best way to do it. So getting feedback from families, how can we improve, how can we better serve our donor families is critically important to us. At the 12-month period, we'll provide them with a Thinking of You card that's at that 12-month anniversary, which is many times and I would say most times, probably a very difficult time to get through as they remember an event in their life that they would probably soon forget. At the 18 months, we send them a final letter of encouragement. Many of these individuals, I know it kind of sounds like, well, that's the last time we talk to them, but many of these individuals become still very active in our donor family council and donor family activities that we do. But we give them some information about the donor memorial that's on the Capitol grounds in Frankfort. It's a very nice place where we have certain events that the donor families can be a part of. So I want to talk a little bit about the registry here in Kentucky, and I know that this is nationwide. Around 52% of the population is on the registry, whether it's in their state registries or national registries, and we celebrate about that same statistic. We have 1.7 million Kentuckians on our donor registry, which is nearly 53%. And one of the things that Robert and I recently did is one of the potential referral sources that we recognize as a referral source that we could probably better partner with, and I've heard the same sentiment from colleagues at various national meetings, is that of the coroners. And so Robert, being a coroner, knows many of the coroners across the state. And so we recently were able to speak to a group of brand new coroners and those that maybe have not had a history with donation and maybe have not had some of the miscommunications that have tainted their desire to partner with the OPO and the tissue bank. But one of the things we showed them is that over the last 5 years, we asked them each to kind of find their county on the map, and then we showed them a progression over the last 5 years of how the pinks and the reds have gone to more blues and greens and dark greens. And you can see over the last 5 years how our mission to reach those circuit clerks and the counties, officials in those counties has really spread. Robert's county, his home county, Robert, what's the percentage?
I'm thinking it's around 86%.
So, and that's done by a lot of hard work from our the Kentucky Trust for Life that we partner with. That's part of our staff, and to help us meet the mission. So why do any of us do what we do? Why do you get up in the morning, and why do you take long call hours, and why do you put in long hours dealing with issues that can be emotionally draining and physically draining, mentally draining? And we do it because of the more than 46,000 cornea transplants that happen every year. We do it because tissue donation can significantly improve the quality of life for recipients. We do it because there's approximately 30,000 tissue donors every year that provide life-saving grafts and life-enhancing gifts annually. We do it because approximately 1.5 million tissue transplants are done every year, and a single donor can impact more than 75 lives.
One of the things that I would like to point out as far as why we do it, and I hadn't really thought about bringing this up, but for myself as a coroner and also as an eye banker, and been an eye bank since 1995, I'm also a recipient. My family has 2 recipients in of organs, and when you see your sibling receive a double lung transplant and get a second chance at life, and see his grandchildren that he would never laid eyes on, it brings a whole new value to what we do. When I was the eye bank director in Lexington at the Lions Eye Bank of Lexington the last 17 years, one of the things I used to do with my technicians, and I offer this to you, anybody that's listening from the eye banking community, is if a technician actually recovered a cornea, I also encourage them to get with the surgeon that would be transplanting it, especially if it was our medical director, and get permission to go in surgery and see the cornea transplanted, and go to the surgeon's office the next day and actually meet the patient. It brought some ownership to what they were doing and purpose, and it really affected all of my technicians, and over the course of 17 years I only had 2 of them turn over.
Thank you, Robert. I want to kind of end with just a couple of letters. These are actually from recipients for donors in our service area. So when your life changes due to someone else's precious gift, there's no words to express your gratitude. Please know we will always cherish the gift and remember your loved one. My husband tore his ACL in a bad motorcycle accident, and thanks to your loved one's tissue donation, he's all fixed up and slowly getting back to normal. He's a firefighter and is looking forward to going back to work soon. So when I read letters like this and I hear people say that tissue donation is not life-saving, I would dare say that for this firefighter who was able to get back to work and potentially save lives himself, I would argue that what we do on a daily basis is life-saving. It's you're providing a second chance for folks to get back to work, to provide for their families. In this gentleman's situation, to be able to run back into the flames when most people are running out. And these are the stories we hear. I'll share just one more with you. I don't know if my gratitude can help your healing, but I want you to know you and your loved one have made my life better. Before my surgery, I was at risk of being paralyzed. One person can make a difference, and your loved one did. That's the thing that should motivate every single one of us to do what we do 24/7, 365. And I think it's important to stop and think about who is at the center of everything we do. We can get involved in busy days, and we can look at our boards and see that the donors are stacking up and the donor activity is there. It's undeniably, we can't do anything about it. We just have to just kind of push through and do what we got to do, but we need to make sure we take time throughout that busy day to stop and think about those families that are planning funerals that day while we're having a busy day. I tell my staff all the time that no matter how frustrating your day is today, no matter how busy it is, no matter how inconvenienced you are today, at least we can be grateful for that we're not the ones that are planning a funeral today. And I think that having the donor at the center of everything we do is paramount to our success and to keep us focused on why we do what we do. And with that, I'll kind of open it up to Haiti and any questions that folks may have.
Thank you so much, Dwayne and Robert, for a great presentation. For those of you who have questions for Dwayne and Robert, please submit those questions electronically on the bottom left-hand corner. You'll find a chat icon where you can type in your question, and Brittany will be moderating those questions. Also, as we are going through the question and answer time, for those of you who are listening in groups today, if you can submit on the poll how many people are in your group, that would be very helpful, and we'll leave this poll up as we're addressing the questions. So, Brittany, I'll turn it to you to get started with your questions.
Okay, first question I have is to Robert or Dwayne. What advice do you have for working with MEs or coroners who are not donation friendly, especially on the tissue side?
Robert, you're a coroner. I think that one of the, like I mentioned earlier, having that educational opportunity that we had a few weeks ago. Many times it's just trying to find out if you've got coroners or medical examiners or funeral homes or whoever it is that seems to be anti-donation. I think it's critical to maintain that open communication, or at least try to have that communication and try to figure out what is the root cause of that. I'll tell you that many times what Robert and I encountered, that people started telling stories of things that have happened in the past. And a majority of the time, it may be just a miscommunication that may have happened 10 years ago, and that that story has sort of perpetuated itself, and it really had no basis in reality. There was a lot of misconception, a lot of myths surrounding that, and I think it's important to try to at least establish communication and figure out why that person has. I think the last thing we can do is kind of raise our hand and write that person off and just kind of label them as just another disgruntled coroner that we're probably never going to work with.
I think it's very important with your coroners, being one myself for a long time, to develop a relationship with them outside of the actual donor process. Sometimes we wait until we're in the middle of a situation until we get to know somebody, and you might not know what they've gone through at the time, what they're going through currently, but as you build a relationship with them, as most anything else in life, it's about relationships, and network with them. You're going to take and build a cooperative working environment. You're never going to get everybody to work with you. But if you get a percentage of them working with you, it's going to be a very successful endeavor. So I would just suggest that everyone take the time to understand what the coroner's needs are as well as what your need is. When that coroner sees you're willing to help meet their need, they're going to work more collaboratively with you.
Thank you, Robert. Next question from Melissa. Robert, I believe this is for you as well. What is in your Preventive Care eye box for the coroner's office?
We have a small container of saline, some gauze, and an instruction card, and a Ziploc bag for them to put some wet, moist ice in.
Great question.
Thank you. And then, Dwayne, I will send you this question. Regarding your survey at 6 months, what return rates do you get? What types of questions do you ask? What reception do you get from the families? And can I receive a copy of that? And that is from Brent.
Yeah. So Brent, I am probably while I work very closely with our Aftercare folks, I would probably be giving you misinformation. So I tell you what, I will have we'll jot down your email address, Brent, and I'll have our Aftercare coordinator send you that information. And I do apologize that I don't have that all that information with me today.
And then Brent would also like to know, do you use eye transplant?
So we do use eye transplant. We were one of the first 5 partners with eye transplant when they first came on the market. We've used it primarily for organ. We have not yet, for lots of reasons that could be a whole other webinar, have not started using it for tissue. We'll be pulling that trigger this year on that, but we're still doing a couple of modifications to make sure that we have everything that we need. Recently, the eye banks, as of I think July of last year, we prior to January 1 of this year, we had 2 eye banks, one in the east and one in the western part of the state, and then they merged into one eye bank in January. The eye bank in the Louisville area began using eye transplant in the eye recovery module in July of last year, and when they did the merger in January, they've all started using that. But we are going to begin using that. I've been getting a lot of good feedback from colleagues that my counterparts at various OPOs that use it, and I would love any tips that people had as you onboarded your eye transplant adventure.
And the next question we have is, do you share your aftercare program with the family before getting consent, and do you feel it helps with obtaining consent?
So our process typically is to provide them with aftercare information at the end of the consent process. We give this as an option. I'll tell you, I don't have the figures in front of me, but a great majority of our families do participate in it, and we provide them with that information sort of as we're wrapping up our consent process. As we're talking to them about research and education, we also give them the option to participate in our aftercare program.
And next question from Brent. Do you transcribe the medical social questionnaire answers to the referral worksheet, I'm assuming in Transplant Connect?
We currently do not do that. I know some OPOs that do, but we are currently not doing that. Now, that's not to say that we will not, but I know what you're talking about here, Brent, but currently we do not transcribe those.
I believe that is all the questions that we have for now.
I actually have a question too, and maybe I missed this, and forgive me if I did. As far as referring patients who maybe die on scene, do you have a process? I heard in Arkansas they have a process where they swipe the driver's license, and so it does. So the police and the coroners on scene actually swipe the driver's license, and it refers the patient to the OPO. Do you have such a process in place yet in Kentucky? We
do not. I'll tell you, I know that our Trust for Life has been working with some technology to be able to do that. And I think we're sort of just in the very preliminary phases of that, where we've been playing around with the technology with our own employees here. But it's out there. I know other people that are. I think it obviously has a tremendous value. I think first and foremost, as Robert says, we really need to get more buy-in from the coroners across our state, because if they're not pro-donation, they're not going to really worry about swiping the driver's license. And
the coroners can call in and have the name checked against the registry, though. They have that capability.
And we do have several coroners across our state that will refer donors regularly, and ask the donor registry be checked. So it's a great question, though.
Great, thank you. Actually, Brittany, I do have another question for you here.
Sure. Okay, so this question in the call center, do you do overnight approaches with the loved ones, and if so, what is your experience? And do you know of any published literature on this subject?
So the first part of your question is, yes, we do. I think that we kind of we try to kind of determine what the situation and what the logistical challenges are. We do try to do these overnight. I will tell you that if it's a death that occurs where we have time to wait till the morning, we potentially may do that. If it's a time frame that if we don't make the approach, we could potentially lose cornea, the option for cornea recovery, then we're gonna make those efforts to approach overnight. In regards to any published material or literature on this, I don't know right offhand. Obviously, again, if someone on the line or someone that does have that, then obviously we would love to have that information shared with us as well.
So I have a bold request for you all. We have an organ donation toolbox on our website, which many of you use in the community as great references for peer-shared resources and tools. And we added a tissue section, which is pretty sparse at this point. So if you have any materials that you use, examples of checklists and examples of educational materials, as well as instructions and protocols that you would be willing to share, we would greatly appreciate a contribution to that tissue section in our organ donation toolbox. If you don't mind considering that, and you don't have to commit here on the phone, but that would be my bold request.
Well, your request has been answered, Haiti, and I think we probably have several items that Dwayne and I can get together, and we would be honored to put it on the toolbox.
Fantastic. And maybe also to Brent's earlier question about the family survey, if that's something
Sure.
that you would be willing to share, that would be great as well.
Sure.
Actually, we do have another question for you.
Okay. That question, have you or others that you know of used video conferencing during consent with the family for medical social history? That is a wonderful question.
Yeah, and actually there seems to be a lot of chatter about using different forms of technology on the I'm going to age myself and call it the listserv, through the portal out there. We currently do not. Again, we've talked internally about how to best utilize different means of technology. I know that we've had donor families tell us that they became donor families, but after the fact they would tell us that they didn't answer our initial phone call because they saw a 1-800 number, and it's their practice to never answer 1-800 numbers. But when they've called back, or if we've called them from a cell phone, they many times will answer. So I think that as we look at different options of technology, obviously this is something that is probably going to be more commonplace than we could anticipate. But we currently have not used this. Great questions from Brent.
All right. I think that concludes our questions for today, and also with that, the webinar for today. I want to thank Dwayne and Robert for sharing your expertise and your time. And also thank you so much to Brittany for coordinating the details of this webinar and for moderating the questions. And to all of you who participated today, thank you for your time, and we wish you a wonderful day. Take care.